for 73 years. On a plantation in coastal Georgia, there was a rule no one could explain. Not about work, not about punishment, not even about survival. It was about a shadow. No shadow was allowed to touch the well. They painted a circle around it, white stones, perfectly spaced, measured down to the inch, 10 feet from the edge, all the way around. That line was everything. Cross it with your body, you'd be punished. Cross it with your shadow, you might not survive it. Blackwater Ridge sat low in the wetlands, surrounded by slow rivers and heavy air that never quite moved. The ground stayed damp year-round, and the sky always seemed too close. At the center of the yard stood the well, too wide, too deep, too deliberate. Men who had dug it, years earlier, said it went far past water, past where it should have stopped. But no one talked about that openly, because on this land, questions had consequences. Eliza remembered the first time she saw someone break the rule. She never forgot it. Not the heat that day, not the silence afterward, and definitely not the sound. It was late summer, 1786. The air pressed down like wet cloth, thick enough to choke on. Even the birds had gone quiet. A girl named Lila, newly brought from another plantation, had been carrying water. Fourth trip of the afternoon. She didn't know yet. Not really. She stepped up to the circle, like everyone did. Stopped. Waited. Because the sun was low now, stretching everything long across the dirt. Her shadow reached ahead of her, just barely touching the white stones. She hesitated, looked down, took half a step back. But it was already too late. Nothing happened at first. No sound, no warning. Just the heat and the stillness. Then Elias Crow walked out of the counting house. Slow, measured, like a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment. From the far side, the overseer appeared too, as if called without a word. They met her at the circle. Eliza was at the kitchen window. She saw everything. Lila tried to explain. Said it was an accident. Said she didn't know. Said it was just a shadow. Crow didn't answer. He just looked down at the ground, at where the shadow had crossed. And something in his face changed. Not anger, not even cruelty. Recognition. What followed, no one ever described out loud. Not fully, but everyone heard it. Across the yard, across the cabins, out into the fields where people stopped working, because the sound carried, and it stayed with them, for years. When it was over, Lila was still alive, but something inside her wasn't. That night, no one spoke above a whisper. Not in the cabins, not even between families. Because now everyone understood something they hadn't before. This wasn't a rule about obedience. It wasn't even about control. It was about containment. The fires burned low, and the children were asleep. Jonas leaned close to Eliza and whispered something he should never have said. Marcus told me, when they dug that well, they found water, and kept digging anyway. Eliza frowned. Why would they do that? Jonas didn't answer right away. He stared out into the dark, toward the center of the yard, where the well sat, silent, waiting. Because, he said quietly, whatever they were digging toward was already there. And above it, the circle remained untouched, because everyone at Blackwater Ridge knew now. It wasn't the well they feared. It was what might happen if the shadow stayed too long. After that day, no one questioned the rule again. They didn't need to, because the fear wasn't enforced anymore. It lived there, in the way people walked wider around the circle, in how they watched the sun, not the overseer, in how work slowed, every afternoon, just before the light began to stretch, because that was when it became dangerous. Eliza started noticing patterns, not just in people, but in the well itself. It never dried, not once, even during the worst heat. When nearby streams shrank to mud, the water in the well stayed level, still, too still, and sometimes, it reflected things wrong. She saw it first at dusk. She had been sent to fetch water, careful, measuring every step, watching where her shadow fell. When she reached the edge, she didn't look down at first. No one did anymore. But something made her glance. The sky above was clear, soft orange fading into gray. But inside the well, there was no sky, just darkness. Not shadow, not reflection. Something deeper. Eliza froze. Then the surface shifted. Not like water disturbed. Like something beneath it had moved. She stepped back instantly. Didn't breathe. Didn't think. Just moved. That night, she didn't sleep. And she wasn't the only one. Over the next weeks, small things began to happen. Subtle, but impossible to ignore. A man named Caleb, who worked the timber line, began waking up before dawn, standing outside his cabin, facing the well. He said he didn't remember leaving his bed. Another woman refused to draw water altogether, claimed she heard voices. Not from the yard, not from the trees, from below. Most dismissed it, quietly, carefully, because saying it out loud made it real. But Jonas didn't dismiss it. One night, he brought Eliza something, wrapped in cloth, hidden. He waited until everyone else had gone quiet, then placed it in her hands. It was a piece of wood, old, carved, numbers etched into it, and a name. Eliza ran her fingers across the surface, trying to make sense of it. "What is this?" she whispered. Jonas glanced toward the door, then lowered his voice. "Marcus gave it to me." Before he stopped talking, Eliza's breath caught. Marcus, one of the original diggers. He hadn't spoken a full sentence in months. "What does it mean?" Jonas hesitated, then said it anyway. They weren't digging for water. They were measuring something. Eliza felt the weight of the wood change in her hands. Measuring what? Jonas swallowed. The depth of whatever was already there. Silence filled the room. Heavy, because suddenly, everything made sense in the worst possible way. The circle, the rule, the punishment, not to protect the well from them, but to protect them from the well. The next day, Eliza went back, not to break the rule, but to understand it. He stood just outside the white stones, watching, waiting. The sun moved slowly above, and as it dropped, her shadow stretched again, closer, closer. She stopped it just before the line. But this time, she didn't look at the ground. She looked into the well, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw it again. Not water, not reflection, something that didn't belong to light at all. And this time, it looked back. That was when Eliza realized something else. The rule wasn't about shadows touching the well. It was about what happened when the well touched them back. For years, no one crossed the circle again. Not with their feet, not with their shadows. The rule held, because fear was easier than understanding. Until Elias Crow died, and everything changed. The new owner arrived in winter, a man named Nathaniel Voss. Younger, educated, the kind of man who believed every rule had a reason, and every reason could be broken. He listened to the workers explain it. The circle, the shadows, the punishment. He didn't laugh, but he didn't believe it either. Superstition, he said simply. And that word spread faster than fear ever had. Because once someone names a thing, others start to doubt it. The first week, nothing changed. The workers still avoided the circle, still watched the sun, still measured their distance. But Voss didn't. He walked near the well, closer each day, studying it, watching the water, looking for something that wasn't there. On the 8th day, he crossed the line. Not with his body, with his shadow. It happened in the afternoon, when the light stretched long across the yard. Eliza saw it. Everyone did. His shadow slid slowly across the white stones, and touched the edge of the well. Nothing happened. No sound. No movement. No consequence. Just silence. Then Voss turned, looked at them, and smiled. That was the moment everything broke. Because fear had just been proven wrong. Or so they thought. That night, the water changed. Not visibly. Not at first. But the air around it felt heavier, colder. Like something had shifted beneath it. The next morning, a man drawing water dropped the bucket. Said it felt heavier than before. Too heavy. For something that should have been empty. They told Voss. He dismissed it. Again. Then came the smell. Faint at first, like wet iron. Mixed with something old. Something sealed. And forgotten. It rose slowly. From the well. And spread. By the 3rd day, people stopped sleeping. Not because of noise, but because of dreams. The same dream. Standing at the circle. Looking down. And seeing something below. Not rising. Waiting. Jonas had it too. He woke before dawn. Breathing hard. Hands shaking. "It's not water," he whispered. Eliza didn't answer. Because she already knew. On the 4th day, Voss decided to prove it once and for all. He ordered the well opened wider, men were brought in, tools laid out. And for the first time in decades, the edge was disturbed. They removed stones. Pulled apart the lining, exposing the inner ring. Deeper than expected. Much deeper. Eliza stood at a distance, watching. Because something in her was already telling her, this should not be touched. The first layer came loose easily. Then the second. Until the sound changed. From stone. To something else. A hollow strike. Followed by an echo. But not the kind that fades. The kind that returns. Different. One of the men stopped. "Did you hear that?" No one answered. Because they all had. Voss stepped closer. Too close. Leaning over the edge. Looking down. Trying to see, trying to understand. And for a moment, he froze. Not from fear. From recognition. The same look Crow had once had. Years before. When Lila's shadow crossed the line. Voss straightened slowly. Said nothing. Just stepped back. And ordered the well sealed again, immediately. No explanation. No argument. Just urgency. Real urgency. The kind that comes too late. By nightfall, the stones were back in place, the circle restored. The line untouched. But something had changed. Not outside. Inside. Because now, the rule wasn't superstition anymore. It was proof. Proof that whatever lay beneath that well, had never been gone. It had only been waiting. For someone. To forget why the rule existed in the first place. By spring, the plantation no longer felt the same. Nothing visible had changed. The circle remained intact, the well sealed, the rule restored. But something beneath it was no longer quiet. That was when the outsider arrived. Dr. Henry Caldwell, a man from Savannah, sent under the pretense of inspection, but in truth, called by Voss himself. Because whatever Voss had seen,
he could not explain. And worse, he could not ignore. Caldwell was not like the others. He did not laugh at the rule. He did not dismiss the stories. He listened, watched, measured, because to him, this was not superstition. It was a problem. And problems had patterns. The first thing he did was study the ground, not the well, the soil around it. He dug shallow trenches, examined moisture levels, temperature, composition, and what he found did not make sense. The earth closest to the well was colder, not by much, but enough, and deeper down, it got colder still, as if something beneath the surface was pulling heat away. Then he studied the water, carefully, without touching it directly. He lowered a sealed container, drew a sample, and observed. At first, it looked normal, clear, still, but when he held it to the light, the reflection didn't behave, it bent. Not like water disturbed, but like something inside it didn't follow the same rules. That night, Caldwell asked to stand near the well at dusk. Alone. Voss allowed it, reluctantly. Because now, even he followed the rule. The sun dropped slowly, and the shadows stretched. Caldwell stood just outside the circle, watching the edge, waiting. Because he had noticed something no one else had said aloud. The rule wasn't about shadows touching the well, it was about timing. When they touched it, at a certain angle, at a certain length, when the light was almost gone, and the shadow was no longer clear, but blurred, unstable, that was when it mattered. Caldwell placed a marker on the ground, measured the angle of the sun, then stepped back, and let his shadow stretch forward. Slowly, carefully, it reached the edge of the white stones, hovered, then touched. Nothing happened. At least, nothing visible. But Caldwell didn't move, because he felt it. A shift. Not in the air, but in pressure. Like standing near something that wasn't supposed to be open. He looked down, into the well, and for the first time, he understood why no one had ever explained it properly. Because it couldn't be explained. Not completely. The surface of the water was not reflecting the sky, it was reflecting something else. Something below. And it was not still. It moved.
Not upward, not outward, but inward, as if the well was not a hole, but an opening. Caldwell stepped back immediately, breaking the contact. The pressure vanished. The surface returned to normal. Just water. Just a well. The next morning, he spoke to Voss. His conclusion was careful, measured, but incomplete. There is something beneath that structure, he said. Something that responds to light, to shadow, to presence. Voss waited. For what purpose? Caldwell hesitated, then answered honestly. I don't know. But I do know this. It was never meant to be disturbed. Silence followed. Heavy. Because both men understood now. The rule had not been created by fear. It had been created by knowledge. And that knowledge had been lost. That night, Caldwell left the plantation. Without taking samples. Without writing reports. Without finishing his study. Because some things are not meant to be recorded. Only avoided. And for the first time since Voss arrived, no one questioned the rule again. Not because they were told to follow it, but because now they had seen just enough to know what would happen if it was broken twice. Years passed, then decades, and still the rule remained. Not written, not enforced, but remembered. Because some things do not need to be taught twice. Blackwater Ridge changed hands. Again and again. Owners came and went. But the well stayed, always at the center, always untouched, and always surrounded. The white stones were replaced over time, new ones laid down. Carefully, precisely. No one could say who insisted on it, but no one argued. By the early 1800s, the plantation had grown quieter. Less work, fewer people, as if something about the land itself discouraged permanence. Travelers passing through sometimes asked about the well, why it stood alone, why no one drew from it anymore. The answers were always the same. It's not needed. Or simply, we don't go near it. Then one summer, a man arrived. Not an owner, not a worker, just a traveler. He had heard stories, fragments, rumors, and like all men who arrive late to something ancient, he believed he understood it better than those who lived with it. He walked straight into the yard, past the cabins, past the trees, toward the well. People watched, but no one stopped him, because they had learned something long ago. Warnings don't work on those who don't believe in them. It was late afternoon, the light already stretching long across the ground. His shadow reached ahead of him, thin, distorted, touching the edge of the circle. He stepped forward anyway, closer than anyone had stood in years. And then, he looked down. No one heard a sound. No scream. No struggle. Just silence. Heavy. Sudden. Complete. When someone finally stepped forward, he was still there. Standing. Unmoving. Eyes open. But empty. As if something had taken everything behind them, and left the body behind. They moved him away. Quickly. Carefully, and before the sun set, the circle was repaired again, stone by stone, measured, exact. No one spoke of it after that. Not directly, but the story changed. It stopped being a warning, and became something else. A truth, that the well was not dangerous, by itself, only when something connected to it. Time moved forward. The plantation disappeared. The land changed hands, then fell into neglect, and eventually was forgotten, swallowed slowly by the wetlands around it. Trees grew back, water reclaimed the paths, and the world moved on, until, years later, a survey team came through the region, mapping land, marking boundaries, looking for nothing more then numbers. They found the well, by accident, half buried, almost gone, but still there, still centered, still surrounded, by stones, perfectly placed. One of them stepped closer, kneeling, brushing dirt away from the edge, trying to see inside, and for a moment, just a moment, the surface shifted, not like water disturbed, but like something beneath it had noticed. The report they filed later mentioned nothing unusual, just an abandoned structure, of no immediate value, recommended for removal. But the removal never happened, because the crew refused to return. No explanation, no reason given, just silence. The kind of silence that spreads. Today, there is no plantation, no records, no official mention of what once stood there, only a patch of land, where nothing grows quite right, and at its center, a circle, faint, almost erased, but still visible. If you stand at the right angle, at the right time of day, when your shadow stretches long enough to almost touch it, and if you're standing there, you might feel something. Not wind, not heat, but pressure, subtle, watching, waiting, because whatever they tried to contain, all those years ago, was never removed. It was only left undisturbed, and some things do not need to escape to still be there.